All right, this is an exciting episode. Been waiting to make this one for a while. Brett Henderson here with Strategic Wealth Endeavor. We got Giselle, the wonderful Giselle, who keeps us all straight and in good working order. And our buddy Dutch. I'm not even going to try and pronounce your last name because after 2 years, I should get it right. And one of those things that I know I'm not going to get it right, so I'll shut up. And how is the right way to pronounce your name, Dutch?
Yeah, technically it's Schotemeyer, but many years in the Marine Corps, people like to call me Schotemeyer, based on artillery, shot over, shot out. So got a lot of that.
So what do you prefer?
Schotemeyer is what I prefer, but just call me Dutch. Then we'll be
All
good.
right, Dutch Schotemeyer. I like Dutch. So I was a dumb tanker, so I can handle one syllable word sounds, which is good. So you and I have been friends for 2 years now, a little over two.
Yeah, couple of years now. I think you were kind of stalking me on LinkedIn, and it was good times.
Right. And so let's talk about that. So I always ask everyone, are you an actual client of mine? I always ask that before we start.
Brett, I am not an actual client of yours.
But before the end of the year, you will be. So that will be changing. So don't worry. And your firm will be too. I've got some good stuff for you guys.
Couple of days to make that happen.
Right. Next year, 2023. And then so we got together, we met or connected when 2 years ago, I was putting together a group of veterans that really just wanted, it actually was initially all Marines, and you're a Marine as well, where we were just getting together and talking about business and trying to get some referral relationships going, and where we could be safe and feel safe as veterans and say what's on our mind and not have to worry about the corporate red tape. That's kind of evolved to the Veteran Entrepreneur Masterclass and the podcast and our LinkedIn group, and we're still doing our monthly meetings. But what was the main reason, finally, I'm going to ask about your background, but just how we got together and showing the power of LinkedIn. What was the final or the push after a couple of years? We don't know each other. You're finally like, hey, maybe I should talk to this guy.
Well, I really think it was your persistence. You wanted something, you were going after. Said, here's a guy that I should probably be working with because he's so persistent, right? And that's a trait I think today many people just give up, right? And so you've got that stick-to-itiveness, as we like to say.
Yes, and it's a blessing and a curse. Giselle calls it the bulldozer. So when I'm persistent, she's like, "You're bulldozing again. You're running over me. Stop bulldozing me." But it helps get stuff done. But if you don't, sometimes you have blinders on, you don't see it. So it's a double-edged sword for sure. So enough about me. Let's talk about you, brother. So you were a JAG in the Marine Corps. Tell me about your career.
Yeah, so kind of varied. Couldn't keep a job. I originally enlisted in 1991, and I was in tanks for the first 4 years, although I was a communicator. Got commissioned in 95 and was an artillery officer for, I guess, about 6 years. Bounced around the Pacific and then the Marine Corps Warfighting Laboratory, which that'll drive anybody insane. From there, I picked up a really small, strange program in the Marine Corps where they send a couple of people each year to law school. So as a captain, I stayed on active duty, went up to law school at the University of Washington. Unfortunately for me, I started law school literally like September 10th, 2001. And so all my buddies, like I'm sitting in law school reading about property and, personal injury claims and, things like that. And all my buddies are out battery commanders, in Iraq. And so I sat on the sidelines initially on that. Once I graduated law school, though, I ended up down at Camp Pendleton, where I did 3 years as a defense attorney. Good times. Deployed out to Iraq. Was the senior defense attorney in all of Iraq, involved in, you guys, some of you may have heard there's some war crimes that occurred out there, and ended up coming home a little early from the deployment. Only did 7 months because we had the Hamdaniya murder case, and they needed experienced defense counsel. So I had one of those guys. I also did everything during that time from simple, unauthorized absence, drug charges, all the way to first-degree murder. Repping a guy who reloaded after he was shooting his girlfriend. So, pretty crazy 3 years. Marine Corps then decided that I should be a prosecutor, so they sent me out to Hawaii, where I served as the head prosecutor for basically Oahu in that area, both prosecuting the Marines, sailors on the base, but also civilians. I was deputized as the assistant U.S. attorney out in Hawaii. And so I would go down and prosecute civilians that committed misconduct on any of the Marine Corps installations in Hawaii. During that tour, I also deployed out to Afghanistan with the infantry. Initially, it was with Special MAGTF A as their judge advocate. And then a MEB came in on top of us and transitioned down to be the Regimental Combat Team judge advocate. Came back from that tour, finished up as what they call the deputy SJA for the base. So basically like the assistant city attorney for the bases and, out there in Hawaii.
Right.
And then the Marine Corps decided that I was not smart enough and needed more education. But as opposed to giving me an advanced legal degree, they thought a year with the Air Force at Air Command and Staff College would make a lot more sense. So me and 7 other Marines got to spend a year at Maxwell Air Force Base, learning all about the Air Force. From there, went to the Pentagon, 2-year tour at the Pentagon, where I was in charge of teaching all the prosecutors how to prosecute sexual assault cases at one of the larger budgets of the lawyers up there, traveling all over the world doing that. And then also I got thrown in the basement of the Pentagon with one other guy, and we reorganized the Marine Corps legal community for the first time since really coming out of Vietnam. So it had been set up in a fashion to support a Vietnam era Marine Corps. And the commandant came to our boss, the general, and was like, "You guys got to get into the modern times." So we basically spent a year reorganize it, me and one other guy. And I don't know, the jury's still out. There's some guys on active duty now that really like it. There's some guys that say, "Hey, you screwed it all up," but seems to be functioning okay. And then from there, I got selected for command. I went down to 1st Recruit Training Battalion, was battalion CO for 2 years before retiring and joining a firm in Newport Beach, California.
Awesome. That's a hell of a career, brother. So appreciate everything you've done for the Marine Corps and keeping us safe, and on the good, the bad, and the ugly. I'm sure you've seen it all, and we could sit here and have a whole other podcast just on those stories. Giselle, what was going through your mind while Dutch was giving his background? Because I'm just curious.
No, that's awesome. You get to travel while you are also studying to be a lawyer. That's a dream.
Yeah, it's an interesting gig. I will tell you though that the Marine Corps, the Marine Corps law is very different than what I'm doing now. Like we were dealing with rules of engagement. When I was in Afghanistan, I was the last guy, before the CO made the call, thumbs up, thumbs down. What does the judge say? Dealing with, like I said, prosecuting homicides and rape cases or defending those guys. And now, I'm mainly just dealing with money, right? And some people say, "Isn't that boring?" And it's like, well, it is boring, but it also doesn't keep me up nearly as much at night. You know what I mean? Like when you're dealing with the human factors that come from the criminal environment or the wartime environment, that weighs on you. Now this weighs on you as well, but it's different, right? When you're really just talking mainly about financial situations.
And it's not your money.
No, it's not my money.
That's the big thing. When it's your money, then that keeps you up at night. When it's not your money and other people are paying you to worry about their money, that's a big deal.
Well, the beauty of being the lawyer, right, is that I'm giving advice, and ultimately, someone else has got to make that decision, but I'm trying to put them in the best position to make the best decision for them. But ultimately, it's the client that's making that decision on what they want to do. And I'm just a factor now, kind of on the team, helping them out.
Yes, my son is here, and this is a little hand. He's massaging my head as we're having the podcast. Hello, Lucas. Thank you for jumping in. You want to sit on Daddy's lap, or do you want to? Because you can't stand behind and scratch my head the whole time. Do you want to sit on my lap, or do you want to go read books? You want to sit on my lap? Okay. Lucas is going to join us for the podcast, if that's okay.
What's up, Lucas? How we doing?
So, Lucas, say hi, Mr. Dutch. Hi, Miss Giselle. Say hi.
Good morning, guys.
Good morning.
The joy of working from home over a holiday week between Christmas and New Year. So no one's going to know when this is being recorded, but this is when it's being recorded. So, but sharing all that's wonderful stuff. And what I was thinking, normally when we have these episodes, we dive into you, which we can do. At the same time, I think you obviously have perseverance, and you've got grit and determination, and you're not one to quit, and you're going to make your life what it is. And also we can talk about soccer, how you help and support as a father there. I think what would help our audience would be some actual practical lessons. And as a new entrepreneur, I've already had my first very tough struggle. I'll just say that and just leave it there. And you've learned from it tremendously. Now, I think though, it's not really known. And I will say legally, especially in California, unless you go through something, you don't understand what the potential is. You don't even really know what's out there, and you don't know what the other side's capable of. And there are plaintiffs' attorneys out there that do know, and they hunt for people. They hunt for opportunities to run them through this machine. Is really all it is. It's a money-making machine for a lot of prosecutors out there, or plaintiffs' attorneys out there, just for money. And California is set up where it's if you're an employer, it's not employer friendly. It's more employee friendly and it's plaintiff friendly. So why don't you just take a minute and just chat about the state of California, because that's where we are. That's where you practice primarily, and kind of how it's set up for business owners and versus plaintiffs. Just kind of the lay of the land.
Sure, Brett, we can do that. So full disclosure, I do practice in California. I'm also barred in Washington, Arizona, and Colorado. We've got operations in all those states. So some of those entrepreneurs are in different locations, can help you out, or if you've got, your operations span those other states. First and foremost, I'm not a political guy. My 24 years in the Marine Corps, I took very strongly, kind of us not being a political organization, right? And so I won't get into politics here, but the situation in California is that it is not business friendly, right? It is a difficult place if you've got employees, as opposed to some of the other states. And the way that California is set up, and I don't know necessarily why. I mean, some would say it's in an effort to redistribute wealth is probably the reason, but it's set up very difficult for the small and medium sized business, right? So if you're Google or you're Apple and you've got hundreds of millions of dollars sitting in cash, if you've got to put some sort of program in, or you have to have a staff person to do certain things or oversights or requirements for you, it's fine, right? That all makes sense. But if you're a 1 or 2 person show, or you're, some business that's under 25 million a year, it's really hard, right? To hit all the bells and whistles and all the wickets and to know what's going on. And frankly, that's actually one of the main things that I do, Brett, is so I'm an outside general counsel or fractional general counsel to a number of small companies, both startups, but also companies that are established and running, just can't afford to have a lawyer on staff, right? It's just the lawyers are expensive, right? At the end of the day, that's what it is. But what's more expensive, honestly, is kind of walking through the minefield without your minesweeper or a mine detector. And when you hit one of these things, oftentimes it's a bet the business type of situation, right? So for a company, an ounce of prevention can be a pound of cure. Brett, I don't know what your specific situation is, but generally, like when we talk about the employee relations, what I've found is that there's a lot of off-the-shelf HR companies and HR consultants that'll throw out, like, and I won't say any names of some of the big, like McDonald's style ones. They'll give you an employee handbook, but it's really not tailored towards California, and it's not tailored towards your business, right? And so it doesn't really apply. There's giant holes and gaps that you can drive a Mack truck through, or that an employee and their plaintiff's counsel later can drive through. And now you're in a tough situation, especially if you don't have the right insurance, which we can talk about later. I help a lot of companies kind of place the right insurance. Obviously, brokers are generally out there just to sell you insurance. And so what your limits should be. And then most importantly, what I find is that the broker says they're selling you one thing, but the policy actually says something different. And when you actually need it, right, you don't have the coverage you think you bought. And so that's what we do a lot for the small and medium-sized businesses. A couple grand on the front side to review the policy specimen before you actually place it, because that's when you've got all your negotiation. So I kind of talked a lot right there. I'll throw it back to you for a question there. Okay?
No, that's good. So I'm going to ask you to just clarify a little bit more. So if an entrepreneur is listening and a fractional legal counsel, that makes sense versus having full-time. Are you comfortable providing a range, or is there a range, or how does someone know, like, what's the affordability? I have no idea. So like, how does that work? Do you mind telling a little bit more how that works?
So fair question. So a couple of things. Let's talk about kind of functionally why you would want a fractional general counsel or why you'd want an outside general counsel. So
please.
So first and foremost, most people come and call the lawyer once the milk is spilled. All right. That's kind of the best analogy, is like, I need to clean up my mess. And that gets expensive. So the lawyer on the front end, if they know your business and they're part of your team, they can help you identify the risks, right? And you can make an informed, conscious decision. Do I want to accept this risk? Do I understand this risk or not? Right. But unless you have a relationship, and that's really what the lawyers are. I mean, we are, we're counselors at law, technically, I think is, one of the things when we talk about attorneys, we're counselors. And so you have to build a relationship, and it just doesn't happen overnight, right? So if you and me, we meet on the street and you've got a problem, like maybe you're being sued for, some sort of breach of contract or some sort of employment discrimination, or, you violated an NDA or something. Yeah, that's easy. We've got a set of facts. I can look at them. I can tell you, what your options are, which way to go. But understanding the business and knowing what pitfalls you may be stepping into, that only comes from having a relationship with somebody and getting to know them and have the business. So how does that work from a lawyer standpoint? Well, the kind of the typical models that you've got are lawyers generally work one of three ways, right? They work on a contingency. So if you think a plaintiff who got, a guy who chases an ambulance, right? And so, hey, somebody got hit by a car, whatever I can recover, I'll take 50% of that and you're good to go. That's not the style of work I do. I don't do that. The other two kind of main ways that lawyers work are on an hourly basis, or on sometimes you can have what's just called a retainer, right? So you pay each month to basically be able to pick up the phone and call somebody. Most small businesses, that doesn't make any sense, right? You're not just going to spend $5,000 a month, $10,000 a month just to have a guy that you can call, right? You don't need that level. So most of the small businesses, what they do is they enter into an engagement agreement where there's an hourly rate, right? That we set on, and as you need it, you've got somebody who you've got a relationship with that you can pick up that knows your business. And maybe it goes, I mean, I have some clients, I've gone 2-3 years where literally I talk to them 1 or 2 times a year. Maybe it's something small, a couple $100, and then we're done. But then when something hits, I'm the guy that already knows their company. And if I can't personally handle it or have my firm handle it, I've got all the connections. I refer them to the specialists that may be out in the legal community. So typically what I find though is that people are hesitant on the front end to kind of engage and begin the relationship because they're fearful of cost. But as an attorney, I only charge for the time I've worked spending actually working on your issue, whatever it is. Is it true that, yeah, we bill for phone calls, all that? Yeah, it is true. Our commodity, what we sell is our time, right? So if I'm talking to you about something, I'm not working for somebody else. And so that's basically how I'm putting food on the table. But that being said, I have a number of clients that have entered into engagement agreements. I've never billed them a dime, to be honest with you, but they wanted to have the attorney that they know they could call. They have already what's called an attorney-client relationship or privilege, because once you've got your attorney, anything we talk about, there's some exceptions, but very, very, very few and rare. It can never be disclosed, right? So whatever you tell me, that stays between the two of us. It never gets out, and you've got basically the trusted confidant that you can talk with. As for rates, like what is it an hour? It is expensive. I'm not going to lie. My standard rate is $600 an hour. However, there's room to move in that. And the small entrepreneurial veterans, I cut a pretty steep discount to those guys and gals, just because it's part of kind of my giving back. In the Marine Corps, there's a lot of mentorship that we do, right? And so that's one thing Brett alluded to. I coach a lot of soccer, but I still am very much into the mentorship and kind of the growth mindset and doing the right thing. And for me, veteran entrepreneurs, which I am one myself, I've got some side hustles that I do, but it's a big deal, right? And to me, like, I think the veterans bring a lot to society. And I don't know, Brett, if you're aware of this, but if you go on kind of like the Marine Corps recruiting websites and you look at the statistics, and today, like literally in America, I think only like 40% of our young people are even eligible, like, whether it be from mental, physical, or, drugs, criminal activity to be eligible to even enlist. And then out of that group, it's something like 10 to 15% even have any interest. So I'm very concerned about the future of our country and the lack of veterans that we're going to have going forward, because I think that the pool of eligible people continues to get smaller. And I think the perspective that veterans bring is very important. And I think they need to be in leadership positions. So I do a lot, like I said, to help people out so they can avoid the bet the company situations.
That's great, Matt. No, I think what you just shared is huge. So the upfront cost is actually nominal. Would you say that? Or do you kind of have like a couple hour just onboarding or 1 hour onboarding call?
I don't charge for an onboarding call or admin to kind of get it. That's just, unless I'm doing something substantive, right? So like I said, it's, Now, if you've got a problem, we're going to talk about it. Obviously, I've got a bill for that, but kind of what I'll call the admin piece of getting the relationship going. Yeah, there's no charge for that.
And is there, and I'm just thinking out loud, is there kind of a year-end legal checklist? You call everybody, hey, for 1 hour, let's just go through this as a sanity check. And that, in my mind, that would seem fair and reasonable. Just kind of do a safety net, like year-end checkup. Is that kind of included? Is that part of it, or is that a la carte?
It can be if somebody wants that. So I do have some folks that obviously have to pay for that, but we have a lot of what I don't want to call free services, but we publish articles, right? If you're kind of following the blog, we actually do a kind of a labor and employment boot camp every year that people can either stream into or come in person, where basically we get out and we put out, hey, here are all the new labor and employment laws, right, that are coming out that you should be aware of. Understand this, understand issues with independent contractors and how that's changed, whatever. It's basically a day-long course that, if their entrepreneurs want to come, that they can obviously come. A lot of people send like kind of their HR type person to sit through and take the notes. For our construction professionals, we do kind of a year, an update again of all kind of the things that have changed and the laws that are changing. And again, we push out a lot of information, but it really comes down to the relationship, right? So everybody's only got a certain amount of time, right? Time is the one asset that you can never get back, right? So just inundating people with things that may or may not be productive is not necessarily what I want to do. So once I get to kind of know the client a little bit, we can help them through. I'll tell you that the ounce of prevention, pound of cure that I see almost right out of the gate, anybody that's got more than about a dozen employees, their employee handbook, their kind of dispute resolution procedure, those things that they should have for their employees, they're usually not set up very well, right? And that's usually an hour or two of us either kind of putting together for that's tailored to the business, or taking what you've got and making sure it's updated. When you talk about a year-end checkup, that's one of the things that I like to do, just because the penalty for failure in California is high if you mess up with regards to your employees. And a lot of people just don't understand the risk that they're taking on, and they should at least understand and know what that is.
No, that's huge. And this is really, really good information that you're sharing. And it just helps people think. I'm sitting here thinking of my own business, and it's been a couple of years, and that's something could be probably even prudent for myself and Giselle to go through and make sure we have everything lined up and dialed in as we continue to grow and do well. And then also, I just want to commend you too for offering discounted services or value additional services gratuitously with your package. I kind of do this, I do this exact same thing. Your veteran reach out to us. Our thing is pay us whatever feels fair. That's what we do for veterans. And most people, when you tell them that, they're like, what? Like, pay us whatever feels fair. And they're like, huh? It's such, they can't even wrap their mind around that someone's giving them the opportunity to drive the bus. So yes. I appreciate what you're doing, giving back that way. And as this podcast grows, we're seeing a lot of momentum there. So I think the community appreciates it. So I think it's great what you're offering. Yeah. What I'd like to do, actually, I'll stop. Giselle,
and Brett, actually, before we
please,
can I add one? Yeah, one of the things.
Yes, you can.
Made me think about this that I see a lot with folks is that people will set up an LLC, right? And they'll think, oh, I'm protected. I have an LLC, right? And unfortunately, they don't do all the pieces that come along with it. Like the setting up of the LLC is the easiest part. But if you want to have protections, there's certain things you've got to do as you're operating the LLC. And just a non-exclusive list, but you got to have a good operating agreement. You've got to have minutes. You've got to be following corporate formalities. You can't be commingling funds. There's a bunch of these things that go into it. And what I see from, unfortunately, a lot of entrepreneurs and kind of the young business people is, hey, I've got my LLC, I'm doing whatever. But then inside the LLC, it's just them. And in California and pretty much everywhere else, there's this thing called piercing the corporate veil, right? Which if you're not following those corporate formalities, the LLC is just you, and you're still going to be personally liable. And people don't understand that, right? So they've set it up. They're on the Secretary of the State website. They went to, I don't even know what, online thing, and got their LLC, but they never did their operating agreement. They don't have minutes at the end of the, they don't have minutes. They don't have annual meetings, which is pretty easy to kind of check in the box. And that is a toolkit kind of thing that we do for folks. That's, again, it's a couple hours, and that's the kind of thing that can allow you to sleep at night, because now okay, all I'm risking is the assets that I've got committed to this LLC, as opposed to everything I've worked my entire life to get to.
Right. I mean, with that, I'm going to come to Giselle in a second. So with that, though, if there is,
talking, yeah.
you hear Lucas telling me to stop the podcast, but that's the joy of doing this. So anyway, thank you, Lucas. So with that, though, if there is a plaintiff attorney and something happens, won't they just sue you personally and sue your business too? So you're sued personally and they sue your business. They try and sue everybody, right? So you just sue as many people as you can and see what sticks. Isn't that it? So even having S corp or LLC, depending on if it's a real estate transaction or if it's a for-profit business, like plaintiffs' attorneys just know we're going to sue everybody.
Yeah, it's a common tactic, but it's easily defeatable before trial if you followed all the corporate formalities and they can't pierce the corporate veil. So I'll give an example of a case that I just resolved recently. It was a labor and employment case. Basically, a gal claimed that she had not been given like all her meal periods, and it was a wage and hour kind of case. Hey, I wasn't given my right breaks. I didn't get all my meal periods. I wasn't paid for overtime. Yada yada yada. Right. And in California, unfortunately, it's really hard to comply with everything and make sure you're hitting everything. Although again, we help people with that. But when those cases come in, you're 100% right. So they sued the company. Ironically, they sued. They did so the two owners, and they sued like 3 other random people that were mid-level supervisors that they thought were actually owners of the company that weren't. And now if you've done something personal, right, that's a different category. But if we're talking about these typical business type cases or labor and employment cases, the reason that you create the entity is because that's what should be at issue. And in California, these legal entities they're treated basically like an individual, right? They are their own thing. And so as you go through the case, we bring motions to get the individuals, the owners, these other employees, we get them dismissed from the case. So is there some upfront legal cost potentially? Absolutely. If you've got the right insurance, many times that insurance will pick up that defense for you as well, but sometimes you don't. But almost always, if they followed the corporate formalities, we get all the individuals out. And the reason that's important is I say you may own a house, you may have another business, you may have, who knows what you've got, what your assets look like. You may have cash in the bank. And if we get you out of the case, all of that stuff is not at issue. All that's at issue is what the business has got, what the business assets are, and that sort of stuff. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense. It makes absolutely perfect sense. So with that though, actually, I'm gonna stop and pivot. Giselle, what's going through your mind as you're sitting here listening to Touch?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about like the checklist you'd have to go through in order to setting up your business, making sure you're protected. But honestly, it's like, where do you even start? There's so many like legal forms you have to think about. And yeah, it's a lot.
It is. So let me ask you along those lines, Dutch. So people think you can either self-insure or you buy insurance, right? Self-insured means you just don't have insurance for it. So when you're setting up a business,
technically not what self-insurance means, but
it means you got to pay for it yourself.
It is, but typically when you talk about self-insurance, people have like a captive or they're doing some other sort of insurance thing. What you're talking about is having no insurance.
Right, which is AKA self-insuring, right? Having no insurance, that you are self-insuring. That's really what it is. And so not putting a legal spin on it, but what would you say should be the number 1, 2, or 3 insurances a new business owner should consider to help protect them? I'm just going to jump in. You got general liability, and then EPLI, and like what else what do you think?
Well, it depends on your business and what you're doing. If you're handling people's data, like I said, you really need to look at cyber insurance, right? Which it's not that expensive. It doesn't provide a ton of coverage. But it's an emerging piece right here, right? And if you've got people's data, I don't know if you're familiar with there's a California Consumer kind of Protection Act for data. Typically, if you don't have more than 25 million in revenue, you don't have to do as much with it. But unless you're in the business of buying and selling data and using it, but if you've got data breaches and people's information gets compromised, you could end up being liable for that, right? And so there's always in your CGL policies, the commercial general liability you talked about, there's always exclusions for that. That's what the cyber is separate. Depending on your company, you may want D&O insurance, right? So it's basically the directors and officers for their actions that you can get some other insurance for that. The auto is important depending on what you're doing, what's your business type. I've got, I just was helping a guy place drone coverage, right? The liability, people don't know this, but to fly those little drones around, like even like the little ones you buy, like, I don't know, we don't have Radio Shack anymore, wherever you buy
Right.
Best Buy or whatever, right? But those
Amazon.
Amazon, whatever. If you're using those in your business, you're supposed to actually have a pilot's license for most of those, which a lot of people don't know. I was helping some folks get through that. And then the liability that comes from those are almost always excluded. Same with your maritime vehicles, almost always excluded. And if you crash one of those things, people always think, oh, my drone was $500, whatever, I don't care. That's not the real issue. Let's say your drone's doing something and a lady swerves off the road because she saw your drone, you distract her, she runs into a school bus and kills a bunch of kids. Well, what's going on with your insurance there? That's the drone insurance, right? Can potentially help you with that. So if you're operating those things, that's one, which kind of goes again back to knowing what the business is, right? Like what are you doing? And then we can kind of help tailor basically your risk profile, right? So not only is the outside fractional general counsel, like I said, kind of in that role, most companies that are larger have a full risk management department, which is typically overseen by the lawyer, by the general counsel in the company. But I also do some of that for some of my folks as well. And I don't, just so you understand, kind of from a business standpoint, I make the brokers work is kind of what I do. I don't do the actual work, but I'm like kind of the guy who is sitting there on the shoulder of the business owner when he's talking to his broker, saying, hey, ask your broker this, get your broker to do this, and kind of putting all that out there in front of the business owner, because the brokers just want to get the policy sold, they want to get their commission. Again, that's a whole other class. We could talk about the insurance industry and how it works, but many times if you're just going through this process, you're relying on that broker to be in your best interest. But realistically, the broker's bread is buttered by the carrier, right? Not really by you. And so they are your advocate. But if you don't know the questions to ask or how to ask the questions, and you don't know how to read the stuff that's coming back, you're really at a disadvantage. And so again, for a lot of business owners, I help them with that. And that's actually one of the most satisfying things that I do, to be honest with you, is that, and you don't see the flash to bang on that for many years often, right? But you really see it when people have got bad insurance and then they tender it and it gets denied. And then they come to me and I'm like, well, you see, you got this endorsement here that, so the prime example I'll give you, this is no joke. Construction company, right? They go to get their insurance, their commercial general liability. There is an exclusion that the insurance does not apply when they're doing residential construction. So think about that for a second. You're a framer, you're framing houses, you went to get your insurance, but the policy says, hey, if you're doing residential, no coverage for you. They get sued, they tender, and they say, well, no, they got this exclusion here, no coverage for residential. You were building a house. Like, that's my job. That's what I do. And they're like, yeah, sorry, no coverage. And now you're left, as you would say, self-insured, as I would say, uninsured. So,
right. That's brutal. So, and thank you for sharing that story. I'm going to come back and ask you for two more momentarily. But what would you say then if there is an insurance or risk on mitigation checklist? Obviously, have a call with you, number one. But number two, for any business getting up and running, is it just general liability, or what's like the first level you would recommend any business have?
Well, again, you need to look at your risk profile. It could be your business based on the way you're structured. Your LLC may be the better first line of defense, right? Maybe you don't need insurance. The flip side is maybe you don't need an LLC. You're just going to go as a sole proprietor and you're going to get a really large umbrella on top of your homeowner's insurance based on what you're doing, right? So it's tough to say. Insurance can be expensive, right? So, if you're running a construction company, man, you got to have your builder's risk. You got to have your basically your ongoing ops and your completed ops, right? You got to have your auto. You got to have you got to have your you don't need D&O depending on what you're doing, but those are the three you got to have. Now, on the flip side, if you are running some sort of financial business, right? Maybe you don't need that. You're a one-man show. Hey, if you're running a brewery, and you got a bunch of people pulling on taps, you better have your EPLI, right? So there's it really depends on your business. And again, for me, that question, I don't know that I'm the guy that's worth like the 2 minutes to call. Hey, this is what my broker's trying to sell me. do I need this? So like the heavy lifting is done with the broker. Say, hey, because the broker is going to try to give you the full menu. They're going to give you as much stuff. Say, well, from your risk profile, do you really need that? And then it's really about the limits, right? How much? What do you need? Do I need $100 million in insurance, or do I need $2 million in insurance? That's kind of where we come in. But if you're operating, I mean, a CGL policy is generally something you need, but many people can get by without it if you're set up in a way that you've. And when I said umbrella, I don't know if that means anything to you, but a lot of people that are in business for themselves or sole proprietors, or maybe are not doing their LLC docs the right way, you want to have an umbrella policy sitting on top of your homeowners and your auto and all that sort of stuff. And what that does is it basically, let's say you've got $1 million of homeowners insurance and $1 million of auto insurance, and you get yourself a $3 million umbrella. So if you get past those limits, so there's some claim that comes against you, that umbrella picks up. And many times you can negotiate with your umbrella carrier for some of your business operations, right? So that it sits on top of your business as well, potentially. And that's something a lot of people don't necessarily think about, but many times that's the best way to do it.
Yeah, I mean, to that area, I think a lot of our listeners, like I bought my first house when I was 22, and I still own it in Camp Lejeune. And I still love to say I bought my first house 22. I still have a mortgage on, it's like 17 grand, whatever. Like it's almost paid off. It just kind of sits there. But so I looked at, and when I had more investment properties, I was like, you need an LLC for each and every one. And you need its own. In California, the cost of an LLC isn't too much, but then you have to pay the franchise tax board every year, $800.
At a
So
minimum.
$800 times every property, it gets expensive. So everyone listening, if you are a veteran, you have access to USAA as well. So I chatted with the USAA about it and just sharing what I went through, what your story is making me think of. And we looked at that course of action, having an LLC for every property I own, but then we also looked at the umbrella policy for liability. You can be at one umbrella policy that covers everything. Every property you own had to have a certain coverage on itself, and then the umbrella picked up above there. And that was, for me, more cost effective than doing a bunch of individual LLCs. But for that reason, also, when I started my business 4 years ago and chatted with USA about that as well, not commercial for USA, but we're all veterans who have access to USAA. And I think they're a great insurance company. We've had it forever. They did have general liability insurance, but I didn't know enough. Okay, this is what you say I need. Okay, right. You're trusting them to give you what you need. And their job is to give you as little as possible for what you need and charge you as much as they can. That's their job, right? But sometimes you just think it's USA, you just automatically trust them. So I think what you just shared is valuable information. Having someone on your side, a mentor that if you are newer in business, that knows what you should be asking for and knows the ins and outs. Then once you have employees, why don't you segue into, for the next maybe 5 minutes or so, explaining what EPLI is and when you would need that, potentially in California, if you start having employees.
Yeah. So the EPLI, right?
What is EPLI?
Yeah, it's basically your employer. It's your employee policy is what it is. So think about the risks that you've got. Like, so your auto is, hey, if you get in an auto accident, right, you need coverage. Hey, your CGL policy or your homeowner's policy. Hey, somebody slips and falls, at your house and they want to sue you. You need, homeowners or property insurance, right? Your CGL policy is for your operations, like what you're actually doing. Your cyber, if you get hit, your employees are a risk, right? I mean, I hate to say it because they're an asset, right? But employees are a risk, right? So they do stupid stuff. But let's say somebody brings a claim that you're sexually harassing them, right? Boom, you're gonna tender that to your EPLI policy so that you can get counsel appointed. And also, if there's a claim or a settlement that needs to be paid, right, it comes out of that bucket as opposed to coming out of your pocket, right? And so we mentioned earlier these like wage and hour kind of claims. Those are similar claims. So that's mainly, honestly, in California, because it's so hard. A lot of people don't understand this, but like you can't let your employees not take their lunch. You know what I mean? They're like, oh, it's fine. I'll work through it. I want to leave a half an hour early. No.
Nope.
California says you're not an adult. You don't understand yourself. One of these evil employers they're going to abuse you. So you must take your lunch. You got to go. Don't worry, I'm going to work through my break. Nope, you didn't get your break, right? No. So and so now you actually are getting liability on you. And here's the other thing that's crazy in California. We've got this thing called the private attorney general action, which is a PAGA case they call, where basically it's like I don't want to go into it, but basically it's like a class action, right? Where now these people can sit in the shoes, an individual can sit in the shoes of the state government and sue you for not only their claims, but for everybody else. And then the state takes like 50%, 70% of the settlement, goes back to the state. It's the craziest thing. So they can bring these claims. There was a case that just came out actually in the last month that we're trying to basically narrow that down. But it's insane. They get to stand in the shoes of the attorney general and bring claims against employers, which when you think about that, that's the equivalent to me driving down the road, taking a video of somebody and saying, hey, they should get a speeding ticket. You know what I mean? Like it's crazy, but that's California.
And get half and give the state half.
Yeah, right.
California's about money. That's crazy. So this is really good. And I could keep this going for another couple hours. I would ask you, what are you seeing then as a professional? Is there, knowing your background is in construction, real estate, and employee relations and labor, is there a certain trend you're seeing right now in California? Is there a certain kind of lawsuit or a certain kind of liability that you're seeing that if there's, hey, if you're going to throw out there, hey guys, we're seeing a lot of this and this is how to protect yourself from it. Any thoughts there?
Yeah. So big picture, I will tell you what I'm seeing. I'm seeing a lot of businesses headquarters leaving California. Okay. And minimizing their footprint in California to the extent that they can do that. Right. And so we have a lot of my clients that used to be based here actually, but now they've got a Texas office, right? Or now they've moved to Arizona, right? And they're still operating in California. And, as you mentioned, hey, you got the franchise tax board and you got to be in good standing, all that sort of stuff. But if now maybe your some of your employees are not here, you're reducing your risk profile. The other thing I'm seeing a lot of is people are outsourcing, right? Staff, right? So they want to have independent contractors, which California is battling them on that, where they're changing the rules on what makes somebody an independent contractor and what liability guy. I mean, the one people think about all the time is, Uber and Lyft, but there's other pieces where that really matters. So I have a client that they've signed everybody up. They say they're all independent contractors. I've got no issues. Like, well, I understand that you're calling them independent contractors, but if they ever came home to roost on this, California is going to call these people employees, and you're actually buying yourself probably more exposure right now by calling them independent contractors, because now you've got a lot of potential back pay issues and wage and hour issues that you wouldn't have if you just called them employees. And like, well, my business can't operate. And this is kind of the discussion was, listen, I can't operate if they're employees. It's not financially feasible for my business to operate. They must be independent contractors. So I'm like, all right, well, understand we've done as much as we can to kind of protect you, put the prophylactic shield around you as best we can, but understand that if this ever goes sideways, you're most likely going to be folding up shop. Like, all right, I understand the risk. I know what's happening. They're very good, right, about their following the corporate governance and making sure they're following all of the things to have the corporate veil not be pierced with their entity, right? So that the only assets at issue are the things that are in the entity. But so when you talk about trends, the labor and employment stuff is just, it's going through the roof, Brett. I mean, it's really hard. I mean, like anybody, you can't say anything to anybody. You can't counsel people hardly at all. You can't correct them. We have what's called at-will employment, but it's hard to fire people. I mean, that stuff. So I'm seeing that. And then the other thing I'll tell you, as the economy slows, which is what it looks like is happening, right? Again, I'm not an economist, but as we move into what we look like as a recession, I'm already starting to see some chirping of businesses that were kind of on the line that have partners, right? And I will tell you, this is not legal advice, so don't take it with this. If you can run your business by yourself without a partner, you are way better off doing it. You have no idea how many times I see these partnerships fall apart, right? And once they fall apart, they usually drag the business down with them. Something that was sustainable, right? Usually it becomes unsustainable once the partners fall apart, and they fall apart for many different reasons, right? And why people have partners. I mean, you really should have partners if somebody's bringing a skill set that you don't have, like you guys need each other, right? That's to me, like from a partnership standpoint. But a lot of people bring partners because they think they're reducing the risk. Well, hey, my capital investment is only going to be half if I bring in a guy, right? If I bring somebody else with me. but typically you're actually just buying more risk for yourself because of the intricacies of a partnership relationship, not the legal piece, but the actual relationship. Because ultimately what happens is somebody feels like they're doing more work than the other person and they're getting underpaid. That's typically what happens. And maybe it's life situations and circumstances, but I see a lot of that where the partners, they can't keep it together as they go through. And it's really sad because most of the time they've put their lives into building something that's great. And then the whole thing just comes unraveled, you know what I mean? And they don't pass anything on to their kids. They don't, you know, the business doesn't sustain. So
So no,
sorry, that was a long answer to your
no, this is exactly why we're doing this episode, which I think is huge. So as you're going through that, just kind of summarizing a couple points. So number one, you've got your business up and running, general liability. If you're in, depending on what you do for construction, you need construction insurance, you need insurance that's appropriate for your business, period.
Right.
And then cyber, we're doing this via Zoom. This is a technological world now. Cyber, you need cyber. I think for my own firm, we have errors and omissions insurance and our cyber is built in. And I think I have an extra cyber policy on top just with my own stuff.
Yeah, so a lot of times there's a cyber exclusion in the E&O. So you definitely, yeah. So you probably have a standalone cyber. And again,
with cyber, it even like says with cyber. So
if it says with cyber, it's got a cyber rider, then yeah, you're probably good to go.
Good. And then just coming together, if you have employees again, EPLI insurance, employees liability insurance is huge.
Yep.
And you can do that through USAA. I'm not endorsing USAA. I don't get paid by USAA. I just use USAA. So if you haven't ever chatted with anyone about that, you can chat with USAA about that. But at the same time, I think it makes sense if you're going out and they're trying to sell you a bunch of stuff, have someone actually understands what you're reading because it's Greek to you. It's another language, right? And it's just like military. You first come in, you have to learn all these acronyms. If you don't know what the heck it says, you don't know what you're covered by, what you're not covered by. It makes sense to sit down with a unbiased third-party expert who can give you professional feedback on what you have. That's what I'm hearing from this. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's right. One other thing I want to add to that for you, though, so there's, and again, this is not an insurance class. I don't want to get into that, but there's two kind of main components when you get your insurance, right? You're probably familiar with a COI, a certificate of insurance. You get this as like a one pager that it's got your limits on there. It says who the additional insureds are. It tells you what your coverage is, but then there's the actual policy. And what many people don't know is that the certificate of insurance really is quite meaningless if it isn't the exact same as the policy. So again, I've seen certificates of insurance that make people believe they've got coverage and the policy exempts it. And so a lot of times when you get your insurance, you're just getting that initial COI, that certificate of insurance, and that's all you're getting is, hey, I'm good. I've got $2 million of coverage. I'm good to go. And you never look at the policy. That's separate. And then on that same note, depending on your business, right, you may be able to mitigate your risk by getting insurance from the people you're working with, right? And so the term that we use for that is called being an additional insured, right? And so let me give you an example. This is a really easy one. It's a soccer example, actually, but it's a really easy one. So, I told you I do a lot of youth soccer. I run our tournament. So we were using a venue, right? We were using a stadium and it was a university that had it. And so as part of the requirement, we had to name the university as an additional insured on our insurance, right? So the soccer club's got its insurance, right? And it's got a special, when talking about business, it's got a sexual molestation rider, right? Because you're dealing with kids and things like that, something that people don't think about. But if you got kids that you're involved with, that's a totally separate piece of insurance.
Makes sense, though. I hate to say it.
Yeah, but so we have our insurance, right? And the university says, hey, we want to be able to dip into your limits. So you're going to name us. So we go back to our broker and we say, hey, you got to name XYZ University as an additional insured in our policy. Just depending on what your job is, as a lot of these veteran companies, you may be able to demand that from the people you're working with, right? You may be able to say, hey, if you're the general contractor, right, and you've got subcontractors, say, hey, I'm going to give you this contract, but part of that, you've got to name me as an additional insured on your subcontractor policy, right? So that's something to think about depending on the type of business you're in, that it's another way to get additional, basically, limits of insurance and protect you when other people are out doing stuff. And then also the big one, I'll tell you about that people don't do, which is, and again, it's not insurance, but it's a way to kind of help mitigate risk, is indemnity agreements. And I will tell you, The number one thing I do actually as an outside general counsel for the small businesses that don't do a lot with me, but they've got a couple of things. I look at two things for them generally. One is NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, right? Because you got to be really careful when you sign an NDA with somebody on what's actually in that document, because there are two kinds out there. There's a mutual NDA where both sides kind of basically it's pretty fair and level. And then there's a lot of one-sided NDAs. Sometimes there's not room to maneuver and negotiate, but most of the time there is. But I've seen guys get tied up in a really bad way in their NDA. But the other big one is indemnity provisions, right? And so what an indemnity is it basically means you and I are going to enter into a relationship. And if anything goes wrong, Brett, you're going to protect me. It's almost like you're my insurer. And that's what an indemnity agreement does. And man, those can be mutual, right? In times, or they can be super one-sided. And you think, in the construction industry, the indemnities, they've changed the law a lot, but they used to be super duper one-sided for like an owner or a general contractor. All the indemnities would flow from, say, the subcontractor. And so no matter what happened, I'm going to go back to you. And so you see that a lot actually in agreements people enter into. And there's one paragraph talks about indemnification, and that's a big word, and people just blow right through it. And what they don't understand is oftentimes that is the most important paragraph in whatever contract they're signing or deal they're doing, and they blow through it. And I will tell you, that is one of those few things where, other than the lawyers who have litigated this stuff and understand what these words mean, people can go sideways, and that's a real tough one. When now you're sitting on the hook, and contractually you're obligated to take care of that other person through whatever. And the other ones, I'll just throw this out there too. I see it all the time and it just kills me. People don't understand what best efforts means. It's a very specific legal term. A best effort, like if, let's say you and I entered into a deal where you were going to give me 10 widgets and you were going to use your best efforts to give me those 10 widgets. And if those 10 widgets are going to bankrupt your company, you're like, well, I can't give you the 10 widgets because it would bankrupt me. If you agreed to use your best efforts, you've got to bankrupt your company and give me those 10 widgets. That's an extreme example. So the language that I like to use is commercially reasonable efforts, right? I'm going to do that. And so like those two, best efforts and commercially reasonable efforts, like if you were just blowing through a contract and you saw those two terms, those probably don't, that's not going to raise your spidey sense. You're not going to be like, oh my God, this has best efforts in it. What are you trying to do? You're some draconian guy. No. And you see commercially reasonable efforts, like, oh, whatever. They seem the same to you,
but they're not.
Massively different in the legal thing. And that's kind of where, when you have documents, like this is what I do on a daily basis, right? Like I wouldn't go tell you how to, to manage people's wealth. I don't know how to do that, right? That's not my gig. But when you're talking about indemnity, you're talking about insurance, you're talking about your contractual obligations. Like I've got one client right now that literally they don't sign anything without sending it to me. And does that cost? Yeah, usually, in 15, 20 minutes, I read through it. I hit the big things. I identify some risk, go back to them. I said, you guys want me to draft some counter language? Now we can accept it. Or yeah, give me a couple of lines. I've got kind of the toolbox, right? Of all the skills. Language and things are like, hey, drop this provision. And I will tell you, typically the other side, the way it works, they don't want to go back to their lawyer because they don't want to incur the cost. So what they've done is they've hired a lawyer to generate a template or a form contract. That's their sunk cost. They're done. They send it out. Most people just sign, right? They don't even, this is the deal. Nah, hey, ask for these things, send it back. I would say 95% of the time, the other side just signs it. And many times I've completely flipped it on its head. Like literally it's gone from being really bad for us to being really bad for the other side because the other side doesn't want to take it back to their lawyer. They don't want to incur the cost. So they like, all right, that's fine. I like the terms. You want these 3 paragraphs? I really don't understand what this means. This seems fine. Off we go. Awesome,
man. Now this is good. This could go. We should keep this going for another couple hours, but time is money now. So I'm hopefully you're not charging for me for this hour, right? Hopefully not.
I'm not, Brett.
That's good. Well, thank you, man. I appreciate that. That's a holiday spirit, man. But this has been great. So before we end the podcast, how do people reach you? Sorry, Dutch. And I said before, I'm a little sick. I'm a little slow. Been sick for 2 weeks. So Giselle did our holiday video. I'm not even in the holiday video because I had no voice, which is great. But if someone wants to reach you and have a consultation, how do they reach you, Dutch?
Yes, it's a great. So first and foremost, I got a really unusual last name, right? If you just Google Schotemeyer, there's not many that come up. But if you, yeah, so I'll send you. Brett will post my contact info, but literally it's dutch.schotemeyer@ndlf.com. But if you just Google Schotemeyer attorney California, like you're gonna find me, and it brings up the firm website, and it's got all my contact information there. And
Right, and we're connected on LinkedIn too. So if you find me on LinkedIn, you can find you just Dutch, just my connection's Dutch, and it's a secondary connection out there, which is good. Giselle, what I miss? Anything? What Dutch miss? Anything?
The blog, I would like to look at that. I think that would be a great resource for all the business owners.
Yeah, for sure. So that's on the and I'll send that to you guys. It's on the Newmeyer Dillion website. So it's basically the law firm's website. So I guess we don't really talk about the firm. Let me hit that real quick.
Yeah.
So we're about 80 attorneys, right? Heavy veteran presence, though. We're here in Southern Orange County or Southern California, Orange County. We're in Walnut Creek, up in basically NorCal. Got an office in Vegas, and we got a footprint in Colorado. We're also licensed and operate in Arizona and Washington, but don't have an office. Full business suites, right? Basically, we do everything to support businesses. We don't represent ever employees. We don't really do any of that plaintiff side stuff, but basically any business needs we've got you handled, whether it's from starting your LLC and getting it going, placing your insurance, all the way to the back end, to partner dissolution, or you've gotten sued and we're betting the company. We basically handle anything for business that you can imagine. Like I said, we publish articles and things like that on the website, and I'll send Giselle that link. We are probably, I would say, 35% what I call transactional, which is kind of this front end stuff. I do contract negotiations, operating agreements for businesses. We do a lot of stuff against the state, whether it be eminent domain type things. They're trying to take your land and not pay you. We got one of literally the preeminent guys. He actually just I think got it's either San Juan or it was or Newport Beach. They basically were trying to pay his client about I think $13 or $14 million for the property, and they're like, no way. And they just went all the way to trial and just got $80 million out of the county. That's what the property was worth that they basically foreclosed on. So yeah, we've got everything. If you've got a business issue, we've got the guys for everything.
Awesome. Well, this is great, man. This is actually, again, a new format for us in the podcast. Is more delivering value. So rather than just tell stories from other entrepreneurs, it's actually having a skill set, a professional who can sit on your side and give you a perspective as a fellow business owner and entrepreneur. So this is right in line with the podcast, everything we're doing, Dutch. So I appreciate your time here, appreciate your friendship and your mentorship. And yes, I'll do certain things to the group, whatnot, and Dutch will be like, hey, think about this. I'm like, damn it. Like, thanks, Dad. Thanks, Dad. No, but it's great because you're doing what you do. You help people, and it's necessary, because especially most entrepreneurs, our minds like, think about the big idea, the big picture, the vision, and moving the ship. You're like, well, yeah, but while you're moving the ship, you got to navigate these landmines in the harbor. Yeah, but damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead. So that's kind of where we are. Actually, you just made me think of a quote I heard. I think it was Bill Halsey, World War II quote. Like, I guess this one Admiral Halsey, I think before he was a full admiral, was in Japan and like in his destroyer, and he's going through this Japanese minefield, and the admiral above him is like, Bill, what are you doing over there? He's like, about 21 knots. Like, awesome, through a minefield. Like, what are you doing in the minefield? About 21 knots. And he hung up, which is awesome. He's powering through it. So anyway, I don't know, a random story there, but this is great to have you on. I think it fits everything we're doing. I think what I will do is also ask you for that. I think you have an annual HR, or you said that one kind of piece where a legal or compliance update for employers. I think that could be beneficial. I like to send that out to my network. It's just a resource, and keep the relationship going, brother. So thank you so much for being here. Happy holidays. Giselle, anything else?
I think we're good. Where can they find you, Brett? You haven't shared
sure. Everyone's connect with me. We're super easy. Brett at SWE90. That's Strategic Wealth Endeavor. Just find me on LinkedIn. Brett Henderson. You guys know me by now. So SWE90 is the website. You can book a call there. And actually, if you are an entrepreneur and you have some stories or lessons that you think should be on the podcast, please reach out. Or if you know another entrepreneur that has some stories and they should be on the podcast, please reach out. So we're keeping this growing and going. Thanks, you guys. Appreciate it. Happy New Year. and
Thanks
have a
for
good
having
day.
me,
Thanks again. Take care.
Good to see you, Giselle.
Awesome job. Yeah.